I came to help my girlfriend move, but her mom's smile reminded me of a love I wasn't supposed to feel. The afternoon sun spilled lazily through the tall living room windows, casting a warm golden glow over the furniture and scattered boxes. I was busy helping my girlfriend clear out her childhood bedroom, the air still carrying the faint scent of old books and polished wood. Every so often, I shifted a pile of photo albums or lifted a box labeled school projects, my hands brushing against the familiar textures of her teenage years. It felt ordinary, mundane, even. But the presence of her mother, quietly watching from the doorway, made the room feel charged in a way I hadn't expected. She leaned lightly against the doorframe, her posture effortlessly graceful, one hand resting on her hip. She was 40 years old, an American Latina woman with long black hair that fell in soft waves over her shoulders. Her lightly tanned skin caught the sunlight, highlighting subtle freckles and faint smile lines at the corners of her dark brown eyes. Her blouse, a soft cream color, was tucked neatly into tailored beige pants, and her confident yet calm presence filled the space without effort. There was a quiet authority in the way she moved, a gentle warmth that made the room feel brighter, more alive. I tried not to stare, but I couldn't help noticing how she tilted her head slightly, observing me with a faint, amused smile. There was curiosity in her gaze, but also something softer, something more intimate, like she was quietly weighing the person I was. The sensation of being noticed so carefully made my chest tighten in a strange, unfamiliar way. I focused on the boxes in my hands, pretending to be absorbed in work, but I was acutely aware of her every movement. The subtle flex of her fingers as she adjusted her stance, the graceful sway of her body as she shifted her weight, the warmth radiating from her presence. "I didn't know you were so good at lifting heavy things," she said, her voice low and melodic, carrying just the faintest hint of teasing. I looked up, offering a sheepish grin. "I've done my fair share of moving," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. She laughed softly, a sound that was light but lingering, and for a moment, the air between us seemed to hum. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. Sunlit dust motes floated in the golden light, the faint aroma of lavender from a nearby vase mixed with the scent of old paper, and the distant sounds of neighborhood life drifted in through an open window. Every detail, the creak of the floorboards as I stepped, the rustle of her blouse, the quiet confidence in her stance, built a small, intimate world around us, a private universe I hadn't expected to enter. As I carried another box toward the doorway, our eyes met briefly, and I caught the flicker of recognition in hers, a moment of silent acknowledgement that went deeper than words. In that simple, ordinary exchange, something unspoken passed between us. A spark of curiosity, admiration, and something dangerously close to longing. It was the beginning of a connection neither of us could yet name, but both of us would feel echoing in quiet moments for a long time. Even in the midst of moving boxes and cleaning out memories, I realized that ordinary afternoons could hold extraordinary beginnings, and that the smallest gestures, a glance, a soft laugh, the tilt of a head, could be the first threads in a tapestry of slow-burn intimacy. After the initial awkwardness of introductions and shared work, a quiet rhythm began to settle in the room. I had just handed her a box of old photographs from my girlfriend's teenage years. The 40-year-old American Latina woman with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles, and soft laugh lines at the corners of her dark brown eyes accepted it with a graceful nod. She wore a fitted pale blue blouse tucked into beige linen pants, her curvy figure highlighted without effort, and her presence felt simultaneously commanding and gentle. She opened the box carefully, lifting each photograph as though it were fragile, and her fingers brushed against mine for a brief instant. The contact was fleeting, almost imperceptible, yet it sent a subtle jolt through me. I felt the warmth of her hand and the soft pressure of her touch without her needing to say a word. The sunlight streaming through the window caught in her hair, turning strands into ribbons of deep black highlighted with faint chestnut glimmers. "Wow," she murmured softly, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I forgot how many of these we kept." Her voice carried nostalgia but also a quiet vulnerability, a softness beneath her usual composed demeanor. I watched her study a photograph of herself as a teenager, the same expressive eyes, the same warmth in her smile, and I realized she was revealing a layer of herself that few ever saw. The room smelled faintly of lavender and aged paper, a combination oddly comforting and intimate. I noticed her subtle body language, the gentle shift of weight from one foot to the other, the way her fingers lingered on the photo, the slight tilt of her head that indicated careful thought. Each small motion spoke volumes, and I found myself drawn to her in ways I hadn't anticipated, my curiosity deepening with every glance. She glanced up briefly at me, and our eyes met. For a heartbeat, we shared an unspoken understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of connection that didn't yet have a name. Then she looked away, softly laughing at something I said about one of the photos, the sound warm and light. I felt my chest tighten slightly, aware that her presence had a gravity I wasn't prepared to resist. We spoke little as she continued sifting through the photographs, but the silence was alive with meaning. Every glance, every inadvertent brush of hands, every soft smile built an invisible bridge between us. I realized that she wasn't just observing me. She was noticing the way I moved, the care I took with her daughter's memories, the sincerity in my gestures. And in that quiet observation, I sensed admiration, perhaps even curiosity, directed toward me in return. By the time the last photo was returned to the box, the air between us had shifted imperceptibly. The sunlight continued to illuminate her face, highlighting the subtle lines of experience, the graceful curve of her posture, the dark warmth of her eyes. In that moment, I understood that something delicate and significant was forming, a connection built on small, careful gestures, mutual awareness, and unspoken interest. The first threads of intimacy were being woven, fragile but undeniable, and neither of us could ignore them. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the garden windows, casting a warm glow across the hardwood floors. I was helping her carry the last few boxes to the garage, balancing one under each arm. The 40-year-old American Caucasian woman with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, soft laugh lines, subtle freckles, and a curvy, graceful figure followed me, steadying herself on the doorframe as she watched. Her dark brown eyes flicked between the boxes and me, a faint, playful smile tugging at the corners of her lips, and I couldn't help feeling acutely aware of every movement she made. I stumbled slightly over a stray garden hose, and she was immediately there, one hand on my arm, steadying me. The warmth of her touch lingered a moment longer than necessary, just enough to send a subtle shiver through me. Her grip was gentle but firm, the heat of her hand radiating against my skin, her dark brown eyes meeting mine with a quiet intensity. She wore a soft cream blouse tucked neatly into pale beige pants, the sunlight highlighting the graceful curve of her shoulders and the delicate movement of her hands. "Careful," she said softly, her voice low but warm, carrying a faint undertone of concern. I nodded, slightly embarrassed, and smiled in return, but the air between us had shifted. There was something unspoken in that brief contact, a delicate spark that neither of us could fully name. Every glance, every subtle shift of weight, seemed amplified. The brush of her hair across her shoulder, the tilt of her head, the way she allowed her hand to linger near mine. The garage smelled faintly of earth and aged wood, with the lingering sweetness of her perfume mingling in the air. I caught myself watching the way she moved, the confidence in her posture, the slight curve of her smile lines when she laughed softly at my clumsy maneuver. There was a grace in her gestures that made the ordinary act of carrying boxes feel intimate, charged with a quiet tension I hadn't anticipated. We paused for a moment to set the boxes down, and she leaned slightly closer than necessary to adjust one, our shoulders brushing almost imperceptibly. I felt the warmth of her body, subtle and grounding, and I realized how conscious I had become of her proximity. Her eyes flicked to mine briefly, then away, a hint of mischief and curiosity lingering in the dark depths of her gaze. Even in the midst of mundane work, the quiet intimacy of shared space, lingering touches, and unspoken glances was undeniable. I noticed how carefully she carried herself, the way her long black hair fell across her shoulders, catching the sunlight, and the gentle sway of her movements. Each gesture felt deliberate and yet effortless, and the subtle tension between us was a quiet undercurrent, building layer by layer with every moment of closeness. By the time we returned to the house, I realized that attraction wasn't always announced in bold declarations. Sometimes it was found in small acts: a hand on an arm, a shoulder brush, a shared laugh, a momentary pause. And with her, each of these acts felt like a thread weaving a delicate, invisible connection that neither of us could ignore, drawing us slowly, inexorably closer. The garage had cooled as the afternoon sun dipped lower, leaving a golden glow that spilled over the boxes we had been moving. I paused to catch my breath, wiping a bead of sweat from my forehead, and she leaned against a nearby workbench, the soft fabric of her pale lavender blouse shifting gently with her movements. The 40-year-old American Latina woman with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles, soft laugh lines, and a curvy, graceful figure looked at me with a quiet intensity one had not anticipated. Her dark brown eyes were slightly distant, thoughtful, but her gaze kept finding me in small, meaningful moments. She began, hesitating, her fingers brushing against the edge of a photo album left on the bench. I sometimes wonder if I make things more complicated than they should be. Her voice was soft, slightly trembling, revealing a vulnerability she rarely allowed others to see. She shifted slightly, folding her arms loosely across her torso, yet leaving enough openness that her posture invited trust. I took a cautious step closer, careful not to crowd her, yet wanting her to feel that I was present, fully attentive. "You don't make things complicated," I said gently. "I like hearing your stories, seeing the way you remember things. You're not too much. You're you." A faint, almost imperceptible smile curved her lips, and for a heartbeat, the air between us held a quiet electricity. The scent of lavender mingled with the faint aroma of old paper and polished wood, grounding the moment in warmth and familiarity. She adjusted her stance, leaning ever so slightly toward me, and I felt the subtle brush of her shoulder against mine. A tiny, deliberate contact that spoke louder than any words could. She exhaled slowly, as though releasing a weight she had carried alone for years. It's like, sometimes I have all these emotions inside, and I try to keep them in check, but they spill over in ways I can't always control. And Her voice trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished, heavy with unspoken longing. I noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the careful way she avoided direct eye contact. Yet the moments when she did meet my gaze carried a depth that was impossible to ignore. I wanted to reach out, to offer reassurance, yet I also understood the delicacy of the moment. So instead, I stayed close, letting the warmth of my presence be enough, letting her feel that she could be open without fear or judgment. We stood like that for a few moments, a quiet communion of trust and acknowledgement, the golden light from the garage windows wrapping us in intimacy. Her admission, subtle and honest, had changed something between us. There was a tension now, not urgent or reckless, but a quiet, charged awareness that our connection had grown deeper. In that brief, suspended moment, I realized that intimacy wasn't only about laughter or shared work. Sometimes it was found in vulnerability, in the courage to reveal hidden floods of emotion, and in the willingness of another person to simply be there, steady and attentive, as those emotions surfaced. And in that understanding, a delicate bond had been formed, one that neither of us could easily forget. The late afternoon had begun to fade into a warm, golden early evening. Outside, the garden shimmered from the gentle drizzle that had passed moments before, leaves and flowers glistening with tiny droplets. I had helped her carry the last boxes to the porch, and we paused to catch our breath. The 40-year-old American Caucasian woman with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles, soft laugh lines, and a curvy, graceful figure leaned lightly against the porch railing, wearing a soft yellow blouse and fitted beige pants. Her dark brown eyes met mine, carrying a mixture of curiosity, amusement, and something unspoken, something that made my chest tighten in ways I wasn't prepared for. We sat side by side on the wide wooden porch, the sunlight softened by the retreating clouds. The warmth of her shoulder brushed against mine, subtle yet undeniable, as if the universe had arranged this small, quiet proximity deliberately. Each of us was acutely aware of the other. The rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, the gentle rhythm of her fingers drumming lightly against the railing, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the wet earth. I felt an electric awareness of how close we were, how easily our shared space could become more intimate without a single word being spoken. "Funny," she murmured, eyes gazing at the glistening garden. "I used to spend hours out here, thinking about everything or nothing at all." Her voice carried a soft nostalgia, tinged with melancholy and warmth. I nodded, careful not to interrupt, and I noticed the small movements that made her human and alive. The slight tilt of her head, the curl of her lips, the subtle way her hair fell across her shoulder. When our hands brushed as she adjusted her posture, I felt the lingering warmth of her touch, the gentle press against my own. It was a fleeting moment, yet it left a quiet echo in my chest, a tension that hummed beneath the calmness of our conversation. Her glance flicked toward me for just a second longer than necessary, and the unspoken message was clear. There was an acknowledgement of mutual awareness, of attraction simmering just beneath the surface. The garden seemed to hold its breath around us. The scent of damp flowers, the soft rustle of leaves, and the golden evening light created a cocoon of intimacy that made time feel suspended. I noticed the subtle tremor of excitement in her hands as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the warmth radiating from her shoulder, and the delicate tension in her posture as if she, too, felt the magnetic pull between us. We said little, letting the silence stretch comfortably, a shared understanding lingering in every glance, every minor brush of skin. There was no need for grand declarations. The intimacy was in the quiet presence, the closeness, and the subtle acknowledgement of something forbidden yet undeniable. As the sunlight faded fully, leaving a soft golden haze over the porch, I realized that tension could be its own kind of intimacy. A slow, deliberate pull that drew hearts closer without forcing them, building anticipation and connection, layer by layer. And in that charged quiet, I understood that we had crossed a threshold, one where silent longing and mutual awareness intertwined, hinting at a bond neither of us could ignore. The evening air had softened, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and blooming flowers from the garden. We returned to the porch after putting away the last of the moving boxes, our footsteps light on the wooden planks. The 40-year-old American Latina woman with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles, soft laugh lines, and a curvy, graceful figure settled onto the wide porch bench, wearing a pale yellow blouse and beige skirt. Her dark brown eyes met mine with a warmth that was quiet but profound, a mix of gratitude and lingering curiosity. I sat beside her, careful to leave a respectful space while letting our shoulders brush lightly, the contact subtle yet grounding. The tension from earlier had softened into a warm awareness of each other's presence. The golden light of the setting sun washed over the porch, highlighting the gentle curve of her posture and the way her hair caught the sun in glossy waves. I noticed how her hands rested loosely on her lap, fingertips brushing occasionally against mine in moments of shared motion. Small touches that communicated connection without words. She glanced at me, a small smile curving her lips, and for the first time, I saw the faint relief in her expression. "It's nice to have someone who doesn't rush everything," she murmured, her voice soft and reflective. The words felt deliberate, yet full of unspoken layers. I nodded, understanding that she meant more than just the work of moving boxes. There was an acknowledgement here of emotional patience, of someone being fully present and attentive, qualities that were rare and precious. We shared stories as the sun dipped lower, laughing quietly about memories from her daughter's childhood, and even about some of her own youthful misadventures. Each laugh, each smile, deepened the sense of trust. There was no urgency in the conversation, no need for dramatic declarations, just two people leaning into a gentle rhythm of shared presence. Her eyes occasionally flicked toward mine, dark brown pools of warmth and subtle affection, and I felt the small thrill of being seen in ways that were both comforting and stirring. At one point, as she reached for a mug of tea on the bench beside her, our fingers brushed again. This time, she let the contact linger a moment longer, a tiny affirmation of mutual understanding. The warmth of her hand, the softness of her touch, resonated more than words could convey. The breeze stirred her hair, and the faint scent of lavender from earlier mingled with the evening air, grounding the moment in a sense of calm intimacy. I realized then that connection wasn't always about passion or intensity. Sometimes it was found in these quiet, unassuming gestures. Sharing a laugh, offering support, sitting close without words, allowing space for vulnerability. The flood of tension from earlier had receded, leaving in its place something steady and meaningful. As twilight settled over the garden, I leaned slightly closer, careful and considerate, letting my presence speak for itself. She tilted her head toward me, her hair brushing my shoulder lightly, and I felt the comforting steadiness of her trust. In that simple, shared space, I understood that intimacy could be quiet, patient, and profoundly satisfying. An emotional rhythm that promised a deeper connection without rush, without fear, and without complication. Evening had settled fully over the house, the garden now bathed in a soft, golden glow from the remaining sunlight. The air smelled faintly of rain-soaked earth and blooming jasmine, carrying the quiet promise of calm after a day full of small, charged moments. The 40-year-old American Latina woman with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, soft laugh lines, subtle freckles, and a curvy, graceful figure sat on the porch swing, draping her pale yellow blouse gently over her skirt. Her dark brown eyes held warmth and a quiet satisfaction, a reflection of trust and comfort that had grown steadily between us. I settled beside her on the swing, careful not to crowd her, but close enough that our shoulders touched lightly. A thin, soft blanket rested across our laps, and she tugged it slightly around us, the warmth of her hand brushing against mine. The small, intimate contact carried more weight than words ever could, an unspoken acknowledgement of the connection we had nurtured over the day. Every glance, every gentle brush of hair or finger, had layered trust, curiosity, and mutual respect into something quietly profound. Today was nicer than I expected, she murmured, her voice soft but steady. She rested her head lightly on my shoulder, letting her hair brush against my arm. The gesture was fleeting, yet it carried the weight of unspoken emotion. Comfort, trust, and the subtle stirrings of something more. I shifted slightly, adjusting to the warmth and steady rhythm of her presence, careful to let the moment breathe without forcing it. The porch around us glowed in the gentle lamplight now, highlighting the curve of her shoulders, the softness of her expressions, and the quiet sparkle in her dark brown eyes. The subtle creak of the swing beneath us punctuated the stillness, along with the occasional distant sound of leaves rustling in the evening breeze. Every small sensory detail, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the air, the soft brush of skin against skin, the warmth of her body near mine, made the ordinary moment feel extraordinary. We sat in companionable silence for several minutes, the rhythm of shared breathing creating a quiet intimacy that didn't need words. I felt her heartbeat faintly through the fabric of her blouse, steady and reassuring, and I realized that the tension and curiosity that had built over the past hours had settled into a warm, steady bond. This wasn't an urgent, fleeting connection. It was something deeper, grounded in mutual understanding and emotional closeness. Finally, she lifted her head slightly, her dark brown eyes meeting mine. "You know," she whispered, "sometimes floods aren't just something to survive. Sometimes they remind you of what's important, what's worth holding on to." Her hand brushed lightly over mine, a soft reassurance. I squeezed her hand gently, feeling the steady warmth, and replied, "Then maybe we've found something worth keeping." The evening wrapped us in a quiet, fulfilling intimacy. There were no grand declarations, no rushing. Just two hearts aligned in patience, trust, and subtle desire. The porch, the fading sunlight, the gentle evening breeze. They were all witnesses to a connection that had grown slowly, deliberately, and beautifully. In that shared silence, with her head resting lightly against me and her hand in mine, I understood that sometimes the most powerful love is the one that grows quietly, thoughtfully, and wholly within the space of trust and presence. If this story of slow burn romance and quiet connection touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another tale of age gap love, subtle tension, and heartfelt moments. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment in the garden spoke to you the most?